Is going to be rain, and we finally have some widespread rain that has been hanging around in the picture since the late night hours last night. It's continued to be pretty widespread throughout this morning. So let's go ahead and start out with your satellite and radar image, where it continues to be just like this morning in the aspect that most of your rain is going to be found the farther north that you travel. And this is a very messy image that we do see right now. Widespread cloud cover for one in that gray color that you can see beneath all the rain. But going from north to south, you'll see that rain kind of scattered like some cheetah spots up here farther to the north and the northeast around areas like Milledgeville, up into Hancock County, just south of Sparta, all around Eatonton and the Lake Oconee, Lake Sinclair areas. Going over to the west, you can see a cluster of some steady and portions of heavy rainfall up around Monroe County, especially down here in the southern component of Monroe County, just to the east of Culloden. More so some scattered light showers, some pockets of steady rain back into Upson County. And then as we make our way to Bibb County, Crawford County, and Twiggs County, especially over to the east into Wilkinson County, once again, scattered showers, some pockets of rain that are going to be steadier than others, scattered about Peach County, Houston County. And then as we get below Houston County, you can see that the rain is a lot more scattered out in nature, only dealing with a couple of spotty sprinkles here or there all across areas like Dodge County, Southern Lawrence County, Wilcox down to Telfair, and Pulaski County. Kind of looks like if you just dipped a paintbrush in that green can of paint and you flick the tip of the paintbrush all over southern central Georgia. The rain is very splotchy down in those areas. So taking a big picture view, you can see that the cloud cover and the messy atmosphere not only exists here in our neck of the woods, especially more so back up into North Georgia along the I-85 corridor, getting into portions of upstate South Carolina, western and southwestern North Carolina, and off the Atlantic coast of areas like Savannah, St. Simons, down to Jacksonville, and a good cluster of some storms that have continued to pass through the panhandle of Florida. Actually, take a look at this. Look how much lightning is associated with this cluster of storms. In fact, I did just receive a video from a family friend that there was a small tornado that actually passed through the Mexico Beach area down near Panama City early this morning, and that was a part of a cluster of a severe thunderstorm that moved from west to east across this area, kind of the notch in the panhandle of Florida. But now the most severe weather and the most flashes of lightning that are concentrated together do remain off the Gulf Coast. We can see that the heavy rain and some thunderstorms still exist right as you get into the Big Bend area of Florida, just to the south and southeast of Tallahassee. And I imagine some rain is probably stretching up near Valdosta, but this is pretty close to our Valdosta radar right now, which is picking up all of that rain off the Gulf Coast. So it has been an active start to the work week, to say the least. And let's talk about how much rain we've seen so far. Once again, the higher totals up to the north and the northwest, where we actually have seen some thunderstorms pretty close to the Peachtree City area. You could hear a couple rumbles of thunder throughout today, but overall we're not forecasting anything in the way of severe weather, so not going to really pack a punch besides some gusty winds that could be enveloped in those pockets of heavier rain. But in terms of your totals in central Georgia, you actually see some flashes of green. So they're going to be very isolated and localized in nature. But those green areas, maybe around an inch, inch and a half, or 2 inches of rain that I tried to pick apart with a couple pixels across Monroe, Bibb County, Houston County, and getting over into Twiggs County. It's actually really close to the radar right there where we have that 1.5 inch total. And this is over the last 24 hours. We may have gotten a few sprinkles that added on to that throughout the early morning hours on Sunday. But as you go down towards the south, you can see those shades of blue get a lot lighter in nature, which is going to indicate rainfall totals mainly below 1/4 of an inch. But in Sandersville, we see about 3/10 of an inch of rain, 2/10 of an inch of rain over in Johnson County and Wrightsville, 4/10 of an inch of rain in Gray, but you can see this patch of green right there that did pop up to the southwest of downtown Gray, and only a trace of rain, only a couple hundredths of an inch of rain down in areas like Chris County, getting into Wilkinson, Telfair, Wheeler, Montgomery counties. Our southern counties just have not lucked out with much rain so far. The good news is you still have an entire day to go through where we do have rainfall chances into the afternoon and the evening hours, maybe even a few that last into the overnight time frame. But overall, no rain was recorded yesterday at Middle Georgia Regional Airport. Now, as we get today's rainfall totals in, we actually will see hopefully a pretty substantial number for the 27th of October. But during the month of October, only 3 days where we have recorded rain. 2 of those came on back-to-back days on the 5th and the 6th. We went through a very long dry stretch that continued to put us down from near normal into the dry category. Then we got a brief bump up in between the 18th and the 19th of October. 0.12 inches of rain right there. That kind of put us back closer to the middle of this dry category, but we haven't recorded any rainfall since, so we are now sitting in the very dry category for the month of October. So this month is still remaining just above about a ½ inch of rainfall so far in the month. I imagine that will get at least above the inch mark as we get our totals from today. Then on average, we typically see around 2 1/4 of an inch of rain in the month of October when you take all the data that we've received during this 10th month of the year, dating back into the late 1800s. Nowhere near the record, and I don't think we'll get anywhere close to it unless one of those patches of maybe a couple inches of rain pops up over Middle Georgia Regional Airport, but I don't think we're expecting anything more than about an inch at the most to add on to the rainfall totals we've already received. So you probably did take a look at the drought monitor last week, and with the latest update, it expanded all of central Georgia into a moderate drought compared to most of central Georgia being just under some abnormally dry conditions with the latest update of the past couple of weeks. And we do see portions of a severe drought that creep over into our western counties like Upson and Taylor counties, and this patch of red right here, which indicates an extreme drought that exists just to the northwest of us into portions of Pike County, Spalding County, but we don't see any other portions of an extreme drought that are really in the near vicinity of us. There are plenty down in the southern portion of the state, but they've been getting their fair share of rainfall as well. But essentially what this means is we're starting to see the implications of the drought. So stream levels, some very small rivers, all those water levels are going to be a lot lower. You're starting to see a lot of crop stress, some tree stress. So making sure that you're continuing to water your lawn, your flower pots, anything in the way of your backyard garden during the early morning and the early evening hours, where you can limit the amount of evaporation that occurs, and throwing some mulch on top of it to kind of just retain any moisture that soil does pick up is going to be a good tip or trick to utilize. But I don't think you have to worry about any of those throughout today, because Mother Nature is finally giving your backyard garden some much needed hydration. So let's get into your headlines. The biggest one, of course, finally getting some rain. We actually will get a brief break as we go into tomorrow. We'll still hold on to a rain chance, but it's not going to be nearly as widespread, and whatever does fall in the way of rain is going to be just a couple of sprinkle showers as opposed to pockets of steady and heavy rain like we currently see. And then as we go across the work week, we will be clearing out as we go into Halloween. It's very convenient timing with all these rain chances. We have them for the first part of the work week, getting it out of the way for that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday period. And then as we head into a weekend full of fun and a weekend full of a lot of outdoor plans, I'm sure, between trick-or-treating, Halloween parties, of course, watch parties for the cocktail party happening on Saturday between Georgia and Florida. We will be clearing out as we head into a very eventful weekend and transition into the month of November. So finally, a pretty messy image that we get a glimpse of all over central Georgia as we take a walk around the quad. Dublin actually has been fairly dry as of recently, but remember what I was just saying, those areas farther down to the south haven't seen as much rain as, say, areas farther to the north. Now, Warner Robins and Perry kind of directly over to the west of Dublin. You can see plenty of wet roads on Cohen Walker Drive. A couple water droplets that are still on the Skycam lens at the Georgia National Fairgrounds, because we do have a light shower that is ongoing in portions of Houston County. In downtown Macon, we've actually gotten some pockets of pretty steady and heavy rain. It was enough for us to even hear it on the roof of the studio here earlier this morning, and hopefully we'll continue to add some more to those totals that we've seen thus far. Your temperatures, they've also been a big factor. Not only is it a messy atmosphere, something that you don't necessarily want to walk outside into, but also it has been chilly. So a chilly rain has been crowding the morning hours, and your temperatures have really not wavered much. The only areas that have seen a slight temperature increase would be our southernmost counties, and that's mainly because they haven't had as much rain in the forecast. Maybe some areas of thinner cloud cover where it does allow a little bit more of that solar radiation to break through. 61 in Vidalia, that is the only number we have above the 60-degree mark. Everyone else scattered about the low in the mid-50s, but a few upper 50s in areas like Rochelle and McRae, sitting at 57 and 58 degrees respectively. So your current temperatures, you can see the shade of light blue that does stretch down the Appalachian Mountains. That's always indicative of a bit of a wedge setup. So that's why we have such widespread dense cloud cover, because this is all rain attributed to a low pressure center that is right smack down near Panama City. So you can see the circulation of the winds right there in that counterclockwise rotation. That is where your center of low pressure is, but we also have the overcast skies that are building in courtesy of the wedge. So kind of a combination of two factors that are forcing some gloomy skies, and that's why we are not really looking at getting any peaks of sunshine until we get to maybe sometime into Wednesday afternoon. Now let's take a look at your dew point temperatures. A brief rise in these numbers, somewhere in the mid-50s, the upper 50s, some areas of light green that are starting to creep farther up to the north from areas down towards the south. But it does look like it is a relatively dry atmosphere. If these dew point temperatures were somewhere in the 70s, like what we see down in Florida and southeast Georgia, that could sprout something in the form of severe weather, but we don't necessarily have too much moisture in the forecast. The only moisture that we're really receiving is in the form of rainfall, so it's a little bit higher than surface level as of right now. And this northeasterly winds continue to try to reinforce our wedge setup, so they're funneling in drier air to kind of combat that surge in moisture from the south. So it's a bit of a battleground when it comes to weather systems that are impacting us this morning. And winds and wind gusts, these will continue to be a factor all throughout the next 3 days. A steady breeze, some occasional winds that are sustained up to 9 or maybe even 10 miles per hour. The occasional gusts we've seen so far this morning get up to around 16 or 18 miles per hour. I imagine that we have the potential for wind gusts up to 25 miles per hour throughout today. Maybe even a couple localized areas that get a gust up to 30. And of course, if you do get a thunderstorm that kind of trail over the area that you live in or you're walking out the door in, then you could have some wind gusts that get even higher than that, maybe even up to 40 miles per hour, which has been reported as far away as Douglasville early this morning. So here's a look at the numbers. 67 degrees for a high temperature yesterday, which was 9 degrees below your average high of 76 degrees this time of year. 55 for a morning low temperature. That was 6 degrees above your average low. So last week we were talking about a whole stretch of days that we had below average low temperatures and we had above average high temperatures. Well, now it's a flip-flop. Now we are seeing the high temperatures be below average and morning lows be above average, and this is because of the increased cloud cover. When you have clouds present, it makes your morning low temperatures just a little bit warmer, but you're not going to see as much of a warm up into the afternoon because all of that cloud cover is blocking that solar radiation that normally warms the surface on a crystal clear and a mostly sunny afternoon. So you will start to see I guess you won't really start to see this. This is something that happens that is invisible to the eye, but all that solar radiation hits the top of the cloud cover and it gets reflected back out into the atmosphere. But compared to your records, we have not been sniffing any close to any records as of recently, which is not a bad thing. 88 for a high temperature back in 1919. That was the record high. In 1965, the record low was 29 degrees, 3 degrees below freezing temperature. Your year departure of rain has gone down to just below 2 and about 1/4 inch above where we should be at this point in 2025. We didn't record any rain yesterday, but I imagine this number is going to get a pretty good bump up when we take a look at yesterday's almanac this time tomorrow. Now taking a look at your sunrise. 7:47 was the sunrise yesterday, and of course, didn't really get a good glimpse of it yesterday or this morning. Sunset, also not really getting the best image of when you have plenty of cloud cover, but it was at 6:49 yesterday. I imagine it's probably down to around 6:48 this evening. So here's a look at your hour-by-hour temperatures. We always talk about this is the time you'll hit the 60s, this is the time you'll hit the 70s. We're not going to see that throughout today. We go all throughout the afternoon, peaking at 57 degrees on this graphic. I do imagine that most areas will not make it out of the 50s today, especially the farther north that you live because of that wedge setup. It's slightly cooler and slightly drier the farther and farther north that you travel, but areas farther down to the south, like what we just saw on the temperature map, like Vidalia, are a bit more humid. So you will start to see some high temperatures this afternoon, maybe right around that 60-degree mark. So that's what I elected to go with for a high temperature today, but for a majority of the day, you're just going to be scattered about the 50s all afternoon long. And of course, once you get into the evening, those numbers are going to try to dip down into the lower half of the 50s once again. 60 degrees is 15 degrees below average this time of year. That is a pretty substantial drop. An easterly breeze, 10 to 15 miles per hour, but the occasional gusts up to 30 miles per hour. Now, I did kind of back off of that with my language throughout the morning because it looks like we really just only have the potential for some wind gusts from 25 to maybe even 30 miles per hour in a select few spots, but I think maybe a 20 to 25 mile per hour gust is all you're going to be dealing with at the most. Now let's take a look at your surface map. All of this weather that we're seeing is caused by this low pressure center. So this is what we call a cutoff low. Typically, we start to see these centers of low pressure. They move from west to east, and this is exactly what this one has been doing. But they're normally a whole lot farther up to the north into areas of the Great Lakes, getting into portions of Illinois, Indiana. That kind of acts, or the jet stream is farther up to the north in this time of the year. So that jet stream acts as a bit of a conveyor belt, if you will. Well, what a cutoff low is, it's essentially a center of low pressure that's kind of hopped off that conveyor belt. So it's a little bit farther down to the south, and they do have a bit of slower motion because they don't have the jet stream helping usher them from west to east. But this one has had the general west to east motion, and it will continue to kind of sit here in this portion of coastal Florida down into coastal Alabama, and it could create some pretty messy weather over the next couple of days. But along with that, we do have that bit of a wedge set up. So we have this causing our rain and trying to give us an increase in moisture, but we also have the wedge counteracting that, just leading to some very gloomy skies and some drier air ushering into North Georgia. But now we're getting into that portion of fall where you don't necessarily need a whole lot of moisture to sprout some widespread rain chances, and we get a good glimpse of what's happening at the surface. So there's just really dry air at the surface. It is a lot more humid the farther and farther that you go up in the atmosphere. So here's what Future View has to say about the rest of today. It looks like rain chances are trying to really move out of the picture. At least the bulk of the rain is farther up to the north of us. And then as we transition into the evening and nighttime hours, it's really just a story of a couple hit or miss sprinkles, but still keeping the gloomy skies in the forecast. And this will allow for your morning low temperatures to be slightly above average once again for another morning tomorrow. Could walk out the door to still a few of those drizzle showers. That's just going to be something you have to cut the windshield wipers on for about a minute or two. And then as you go into Tuesday afternoon, maybe still a few sprinkles, but overall I think it's just going to be a story of some breezy and some gloomy weather throughout your Tuesday. Then we transition into Wednesday morning, where we start to see a lot more widespread rain creeping closer and closer from the west. Right now it's mainly of the light nature as we go into that early morning time frame. And then as we go into the afternoon, we'll start to see that rain organize just a little bit. But you do start to see some breaks in cloud cover. I think our high temperature will be a little bit warmer on Wednesday as opposed to today and tomorrow, but we're only talking about a couple of degrees because it still is a mostly cloudy atmosphere. And then this rain starts to get a bit of organization because a frontal boundary will start to move through, courtesy of a system that is way up to the north and the northwest, back over into portions of the Rocky Mountains right now. That will eventually sweep through, and it will grab all the available moisture that is ahead of it and sprout at least some widespread light shower chances. I think everyone does have a good likelihood of seeing some rain on Wednesday. It does look like pretty good coverage, but in terms of long lasting, not looking to be the same scenario as what the rain chances are looking like today. And as we go into the nighttime hours on Wednesday, 8 p.m. right there, looks like most of that rain is exiting stage right, and we just have some breezy conditions and maybe even some wraparound moisture that tries to still keep some of the gloomy skies and maybe a few isolated sprinkles in the forecast for your Thursday afternoon. So for the rest of today, some areas farther up to the north are going to maybe see about another ½ inch of rain, maybe even another inch of rain. But when you add up all the totals that we do see through Wednesday at 7 p.m., still just only a couple tenths of an inch to add on to the totals that we've already seen. So it does look like most of our rain, we've already gotten it thus far. But if you live farther to the north in Jasper, Putnam, Hancock counties, you may luck out with about another ½ inch to an inch of rain. That is generally where there's more agreement that we'll see more widespread rain in nature farther to the north in the state of Georgia. And in terms of your breeze, it will be a factor all throughout today, continuing to be out of the east and the northeast. Occasional gusts up to 20 or 25 miles per hour possible. The breeze doesn't really go away for your Tuesday afternoon, still seeing gusts up to 16, maybe 18 miles per hour. And then going into Wednesday, with the passage of this frontal boundary, it does look like widespread gusts up to 20 to 25 miles per hour are possible once again, and we could still have a bit of that breeze lingering on the backside of the passage of that cold front. So over the next 3 days, all of what I just showed you summed up in a simple graphic. 60 degrees for a high temperature today and tomorrow will be a lot like today. We'll probably see a lot of areas that don't even climb out of the 50s. But the rain chances definitely go down. 90% chance of a shower or just hearing a few rumbles of thunder. Like I mentioned, this is just going to really be a pocket of some heavy rain, maybe some gusty winds, and obviously things get a little bit loud outside, but it's not going to be anything in the way of severe weather. Now we go into Wednesday, morning low temperatures pretty much unchanging over the next 3 days, right there around the 50-degree mark. Then 64 for a high temperature as we transition into Wednesday afternoon. You see the most amount of sunshine on any of these icons for Wednesday afternoon, and I think it's really going to be the late afternoon right there before sunset where you actually get the best peaks of some sunshine. About a 60% chance of seeing some mainly light rain showers, but maybe a few pockets of some steadier and some heavier rain. So the northeast winds continue to keep North Georgia dry, but south and southeast Georgia, getting down into Florida, are the more humid areas. Your dew point temperatures right there on the dividing line between the 50s and the 60s. And dew point temperatures in the 60s, still in that not bad category. So if you're worried about it feeling really swampy outside, it's not going to have that feel whatsoever. And your temperatures are a whole lot cooler. You don't need to worry about those temperatures feeling a couple degrees warmer. They won't get near the threshold to where we start having feels like numbers that feel maybe a couple degrees warmer. Now we go into Tuesday afternoon. It looks like we continue to see the wedge kind of dominate the forecast throughout Tuesday, keep the humidity lower, and that's a big reason why your rain chances are very low, besides an occasional sprinkle or two as we go into your Tuesday afternoon. Then Wednesday, we start to see any form of humidity that we still have left in the forecast bunch up ahead of that frontal boundary. And what's going to happen after that front passes? A reinforcement of drier air and a westerly breeze that will continue to settle in as we head into Thursday. So your morning low temperatures will remain right there just above average for the next 3 days. But then once we start to clear out, we get that cloud cover out of the forecast. Thursday and Friday mornings, 41 and 40 degrees for your morning low temperatures. In fact, those numbers do get a little bit lower as we head into the weekend. And your afternoon high temperatures, they will see a bit of a warm up. However, still temperatures that are well below average, indicating that this frontal boundary is actually going to influence your high temperatures more as opposed to your low temperatures, but it looks like we're going to see maybe about a 10-degree drop. This is some pretty substantial cool and dry air that's going to arrive behind the frontal boundary that passes later into Wednesday afternoon. And speaking of the humidity, you will see as we go into the end of the work week and the beginning of the weekend, it does remain in this very pleasant category. Dew point temperatures in the 40s or even lower than that into the 30s. We're not going to have any better rain chances until we get some of these plots to go back up closer to that light green box, the humid category, where we have a little bit of moisture to work with. So your long range models, it is smooth sailing as we go into Thursday afternoon, besides maybe a couple of sprinkles that want to hang around in the picture. But going into Halloween morning, it is going to be a nice and clear start to the day. And as we transition into the evening, when many of you are heading out in the neighborhood, trick-or-treating, you're heading out to Halloween parties, it's going to get cool, don't get me wrong, but it is going to be crystal clear, not going to have to worry about rain for your Halloween forecast. Going into Saturday now, maybe some fronts that are trying to get closer and closer, but we still are a moisture-starved atmosphere, so we're not going to have much to work with. If a front does pass through, it's going to be one of those invisible fronts that maybe sends a couple of clouds into the forecast, but it's not going to produce widespread rain chances, and we continue the dry trend into the beginning of the work week, next Monday, one day before Election Day. So your Halloween day planner, a brisk and chilly start with plenty of sunny skies around 9 a.m., pleasant and sunny in the afternoon. In the late evening, when many of you are out and about celebrating the holiday, that's when you're going to want to make sure you have some layers under whatever Halloween costume that you are wearing. And if you do have a Halloween costume that is a fairly warm outfit, well, you're going to be good to go in terms of that. 45 for a temperature around 9 a.m., 66 as we go into the afternoon. So that's still not very warm whatsoever, especially if you pair it up with the breeze. It's probably still going to have a little bit of a chill in the air, but at least the sunshine will provide you with a little bit more warmth than what we're seeing today, tomorrow, and into Wednesday. And then temperatures down into the 50s after sunset. Like I said, those numbers are just going to get cooler and cooler the later that you stay out. Want to make sure that you're planning accordingly. But let's take a look back at history. How about Halloween the last 10 years on record? Well, we have seen some pretty warm Halloweens over the last decade. 90 degrees for a high temperature in 2016, 9 years ago. And we have had a few Halloweens that have recorded some rain. Nearly a ½ inch of rain back in 2019. A T right there for the precipitation in 2020, which means just a trace of rain. That's only a few droplets of rain that have registered. It's not even enough to total 1/100th of an inch of rain. So a minuscule rain amount back in 2020. 2022, we recorded just over a 1/10 of an inch of rain. But every other Halloween in the last 10 years, we have not seen rain whatsoever. But a high temperature around 66 degrees for Halloween on Friday afternoon. We've actually seen some days that have been a little bit cooler. 64 for a high temperature back in 2023 for Halloween. And I think that's the coolest number that we do see. But our lows are forecasted around the 40-degree mark. We'll have our fair share of areas that get into the upper 30s. The only time we've seen that in the last 10 years, back in 2017, and we had a high temperature of 77 to supplement that. So it's going to be a bit of a different feel and one of the coolest Halloweens that we have seen over the last decade. And something that has sparked a lot of talking points as of recently, Hurricane Melissa. Over the course of this weekend, Melissa rapidly intensified from a tropical storm now up to Category 5 status. Actually, it's continued to strengthen since the last update. 165 mile-per-hour winds. Pressure is down to 908 millibars. We talk about when you start to get below the 1,000 millibar mark, that's when you start to see strengthening signs with the tropical system. Well, this is nearly 100 millibars below that threshold. But Melissa is moving to the west at 3 miles per hour. It continues to have a very slow motion. Take a look at that track over the last couple of days. It's really just kind of hung out in this portion of the central Caribbean, but it has begun to rapidly intensify in a more conducive environment for development. Melissa is forecasted to make a northward turn as we go throughout the rest of your Monday into Monday evening, and is forecasted to hit the southern coast of Jamaica, where it's already sending bands and bands of tropical rain to, as a Category 5 storm. So yes, this is going to have some pretty drastic and devastating impacts down in Jamaica. And then after that, it will weaken a little bit after moving over that much land, but it still is forecasted to impact eastern Cuba as a major hurricane of Category 3 status before eventually moving up into the southeastern Bahamas, pretty close to Turks and Caicos as a Category 2 storm. Then past that, it looks like it's going to continue to make a beeline path over towards Bermuda as still a low-end Category 2 or a high-end Category 1 storm. The good news is this cone goes well away from the United States. Only areas of southern Florida are probably going to see some increased rip currents and some pretty high waves over the course of the next couple of days. Other than that, U.S. impacts are looking slim to none. So that is a very good sign, but of course, everyone down there in the Caribbean, we're definitely thinking about them. Hopefully they're continuing to take those last-minute precautions to prepare for the arrival of major Hurricane Melissa. So speaking of those areas in the Caribbean, we continue to see some watches and warnings issued. That red shade right there, a hurricane warning, meaning hurricane force impacts. 74 plus mile per hour winds, but obviously the winds are well above that by nearly 100 miles per hour. That extends for eastern Cuba and the island of Jamaica. Haiti still under a tropical storm warning, meaning the tropical storm force impacts of winds that are a little bit less than 74 miles per hour are still expected within the next 36 hours. And we also see our hurricane watch issued for the southeast Bahamas and Turks and Caicos right there, meaning hurricane force conditions are likely within the next 48 hours. So, of course, all these areas are going to need to stay up to date with all of the updates that come out with Melissa over the next couple of days. But Melissa, with that rapid intensification, it did give us an uptick in some of our numbers. Now makes the 5th hurricane that we've seen so far. It became the 13th named storm that we've seen so far in the 2025 hurricane season as of late last week, compared to average, what we normally see, 14 named storms. We're only 2 hurricanes off of what we typically see on average, but we have exceeded average and we have actually matched what Colorado State forecasted for us this year with 4 major hurricanes, and Melissa now marks the 3rd out of those 4 hurricanes to reach Category 5 status, along with Hurricane Aaron and I believe it was Hurricane Umberto. And both of those didn't really have too many impacts, but of course Melissa is looking to probably be the most impactful hurricane that we've seen in the 2025 hurricane season. So your 7-day forecast, it continues to be a very fun graphic, the Mummy and Frankenstein dancing on top of Halloween. And like I said, it's a welcome trade-off. We'll get the rain chances out of here, but still high temperatures are going to be below the 70-degree mark as we head into the weekend. Going to be a messy first half of the work week, but I promise you it will be a clear into the work week and a clear weekend ahead. Just make sure that you're breaking out your favorite hoodie and wearing some layering with some cool temperatures. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you here at 11 a.m. once again tomorrow.